Welcome to Indications and Warnings, everyone, with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this episode of Indications and Warnings on December 30th, 2024. It is day 1041 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Let's begin with some good news from the battlefield, Chuck. November and December have been the deadliest months for the Russian invaders. More than 45,000 Russians killed, wounded, or gone missing in action or taken captive. More than 45,000 in November, more than 45,000 in December.
You know, these losses are unsustainable. And we've looked at the total number of Russian casualties since the full-scale invasion, which by no means is their total number of casualties. This war's been going on for 10 years, and we may infer, a median burn rate through even the most modest periods of combat would be several hundred Russians a day. Through, for example, battles for the Donetsk airport and all these other places that have been forgotten. Now, but I did a little back-of-the-envelope math today, and total Russian losses just in the last 1,000 or so days, they are the numerical equivalent of France, Germany, and the UK losing every single one of the people in their armed forces. They have lost the equivalent of the armies of 4 NATO countries, and I'd like to frame it this way. They're still not in Kyiv, and they're never going to get there.
No, they're never going to get there. The total casualties approaching 790,000. That's just shy of that. It's 787,940. And for the third time yesterday, Russian daily casualties surpassed 2,000. It's just the utter waste of human life that the Russians are sacrificing for whatever reason I cannot figure out.
Well, and every point of contact, and the Russian modus operandi, as we know, is a series of pinpricks all over the zero line as it goes from Kupiansk all the way down to Kherson and every spot in between. Virtually every 15 or 20 kilometers, and in many cases much closer, 2 or 3 kilometers, there is a Russian attack almost every day. Another bit of the sort of underreported, underanalyzed facts are every time the Russians attack, and almost invariably it is them attacking and not the other way around, the Russians lose somewhere between 30 and 85 or 90% of the attacking force. So we're talking about utter futility. At the bottom end of that number, when they're losing 10 to 15 to 20% of the attack falls apart. That's a bad sign, right? Those are sustainable losses in a planned military operation. It never goes that far. So how is it that the numbers get higher? It's because the Russians blunder into these kill boxes that are waiting for them. And in the case where the Russians lost 900 people in one contact at Kupiansk, it was over in 20 minutes.
And yet Putin continues to believe he can defeat Ukraine, he can win this war, he can overthrow the government and occupy the country. He's not ready to negotiate. People should figure that out right away. Just because President-elect will be inaugurated on January 20th, this war is not coming to an end anytime soon. I don't think that Trump can pull that rabbit out of any hat anywhere.
No, I don't think so. That's another thing. It's sort of underreported, underanalyzed, and you and I read the international press daily. To show you where this sits in the big, global soup of daily information, the front page of the BBC for Ukraine often shows articles that are 3 and 4 weeks old, right? That's how often they get to do a feature, and they ignore lots of important things like this 30 to 80% casualty number we're talking about. Look, you and I don't pull those figures out of our ears. We do the homework every day, right? We're mapping it every day. So and again, you know, Putin's big offensive this summer has captured 1% of Ukrainian territory at a loss of, I don't know, what we're looking at approximately 400,000 casualties just this year.
Quite possible, quite possibly. And again, people really have to understand the context. There's so much reporting about the speed of Russian advances in the east. Uh, People need to remember Putin wanted all of Donetsk, all of Luhansk, all of Kherson, and Zaporizhia oblasts occupied. Not a single of those wishes have been handed to him by his military in Ukraine.
No, they haven't been. And almost more importantly, it's hard to wrap your arms around this one as well. Putin's goal is to occupy and subdue the entire nation. That anyone can see that this isn't going to happen. Undersupplied, beleaguered, outnumbered, out-equipped, uh, crushed in terms of airstrikes and volumes of fire. The Ukrainian army is frustrating Russia at every turn. That's just the facts. This war is not winnable by Putin, but you made this spot-on assessment. In the space between Putin's ears, he thinks this is winnable.
He does. He really does.
Do it.
There were reports of an official Russian plane landing in New York yesterday, then continuing on to Washington. Uh, a lot of speculation about who was on that plane. No one seems to know. Speculation that it was an indication of some kind of secret negotiations between the United States and Russia. I have my doubts about that, Chuck. I really do.
I do as well. And there are you and I were talking at the end of last show behind the curtain, and Alan and I were talking about a CIA officer of long acquaintance of a good friend of mine, whose entire expertise was the psychological aspects of geopolitical operations. Boil this down into much, much more simpler terms that she would like. But you've got the irresistible force of Putin and the irresistible force of Trump coming together. Uh, Putin thinks he's going to win this war. He thinks he's going to sit down at a table and he's going to out negotiate and tie a knot in Trump's tail. Trump thinks the same thing. What this particular officer, and again, she's a scholar, PhD. I'm not going to blow her name here, but she looks ahead to the human factors and the psychological baggage that both these men bring to the table. And believe me, a disappointed Trump, a Trump that thinks he's been embarrassed, a Trump that thinks he's been lied to, he's going to do everything he can to destroy Putin. And frankly, I don't see Putin sitting down and negotiating in good faith. It's not who he is. It's not his DNA. And I see this blowback coming. And it simply comes down to basically, I'm going to be very kind here, two type alpha personalities. Some people might say schoolyard bullies. Some people might wonder who gets the bully hat. But that's going to be a bad thing when it happens. And I think it is going to happen.
Yeah, obviously there will be negotiations eventually. There's no question about it. Putin has also gone so far as to say that He won't negotiate with Zelensky or any member of the current Ukrainian government because it's not legitimate. Uh, this is just Russian propaganda uh, rolling its wheels on the way to peace negotiations. Um, but the other thing I would point out, all those people suggesting that it's a small thing for Ukraine to concede territory in exchange for peace or a ceasefire, you have to remember uh, exchanging parts of occupied Ukraine means giving up millions and millions of Ukrainian people. They don't want to be in occupied Ukraine, where Russia is forcing them to take Russian passports if they want medical care, if they want to work, if they want to continue to own their own home or business. And obviously, Ukrainians don't want to exchange their Ukrainian passport for a Russian passport. Whatever benefits come with it, they don't want to do that.
No, absolutely not. And how could you negotiate with anyone in the Kremlin, right? You've got Foreign Minister Lavrov, who told Liz Truss 12 hours before the invasion that there wasn't going to be an invasion, right? You've got Putin, who also was a signatory to the Bucharest declarations, which guaranteed Ukrainian sovereignty and security. He violated that one. He ask the Chechens what it is like to negotiate with Putin. Ask them what happened after a truce, ceasefire, suspension of hostilities, where the Russians simply regrouped and laid waste to the nation of Chechnya. They are not people to be negotiated with, or people with whom you can conclude any kind of an agreement. Again, it's Russia almost benefits from this, their post-Soviet baggage. They're able to spin this into, we're constantly being accused of this and that. And yeah, rightly so, dude. And in some cases, the evil is so incredibly deep, you can't comprehend it. You think it couldn't possibly be the way that they're doing it.
I know, and you're right. It strains your imagination. It is the kind of evil you don't want to look in the face, frankly. 189 Ukrainian prisoners of war were returned to Ukraine today. Just shy of 4,000 Ukrainian prisoners of war have been exchanged in the course of this war now. And the stories, of course, that the prisoners tell of torture, including sexual torture, of starvation, um, are horrifying. And that is one part of the evil that Russia is committing against the nation of Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, the soldiers of Ukraine, every single day.
Right. And that, it starts right on the zero line, where there is a policy, the systematic extermination of wounded, disarmed Ukrainian combatants. You're going to get, you have a better than 70% chance of simply being executed on the battlefield. And the chances actually go down the farther you get from the zero line as you are handed up the chain of custody. Someone is going to shoot you.
Yeah.
Someone is just going to do it. Nothing restrains them from doing it. They're encouraged to do it. There is no punishment for, and you and I both know, look, it's murder. It isn't war. If you have a wounded, disarmed belligerent on your hands, it's murder. You don't get to shoot him.
It is cold-blooded murder.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess, another reason why Putin doesn't want to negotiate right now is he does believe he's winning. But the Biden administration might have changed his mind today with its announcement of $2.5 billion of military aid to Ukraine. This was announced December 30th, so today. And there's just about everything in it you could possibly want, except F-16s. But it's a pretty expansive list. It includes things that Ukraine has never received before from the United States, including Hawk air defense.
Yeah. So, there's the Hawk system is one of the things that just really, you know, stews my crock. There are it's an older system. It in the 80s and 90s, it was kind of the state of the art, highly mobile, uh, intermediate range air defense, mostly a point defense system, but you know, could take out things up to 65,000 feet. It had a low level capability as well, highly portable. You could literally tow one of these batteries behind a Jeep. I mean, that's about as mobile as you could get. Uh, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these systems in the Mojave Desert. They were never going to be brought back. There's other things now that have superseded it. It's a venerable system, but goddamn, it works, and it's a hell of a lot better than nothing. And this is something. Everything that was announced today, it should have been there 3 years ago. And the congratulatory tone that the White House is taking, it just chaps my hide.
Yeah, I mean, better late than never. But how long and how far uh, i- until something really begins to go wrong for Ukraine? So how long do you have to wait? How far do you have to go to beg for the munitions you need to defend yourself and effectively?
And you're right. And most of the things on this list are coming to Ukraine literally on a slow boat,
Yeah.
right? They're going to cross the Atlantic at 12 knots. That ain't too fast, right? So a marathon runner can probably do a little better. Uh, there are some good things on this list. There are munitions for the NASAM system, Norwegian National Standard Air Defense System. It fires an capable air-to-air missile from the ground. The Norwegians adapted that. Pretty good piece of gear. We mentioned the Hawk missile system. More Stingers, more air-to-ground munitions, which include a lot of different things. We could get into that later. High-speed anti-radiation missiles, which are key to blinding Russian air defense to open the door for other precision strike munitions. Uh, Javelin and AT-4 missile systems. Javelin, of course, is a anti-tank guided missile. The AT-4, which is one of the reasons why my ears ring a lot. It is a unguided, shoulder-fired, very, very capable anti-tank rocket. Uh, there isn't a tank in the world that it can't take out, and especially in close fighting. The thing is, the humans got to aim it, but it's a good piece of gear as well. But everything down to literally clothing, individual equipment. So we're talking socks, pants, web gear. Ukraine needs everything. It just bugs the hell out of me, Alan, when Congress said no a year ago, this should have happened the next day.
No,
But it didn't,
no.
for whatever reason.
And no one knows what that reason is really. A complete misapprehension of what the risk of Putin's nuclear option really entailed. There was next to no risk. And Jake Sullivan apparently convinced Biden, or maybe Biden had this thought already formed in his own mind that it was a 50-50 chance. And there just has never been uh, such such a chance that Putin would choose uh, to go nuclear. It doesn't. It's not a 50-50 chance.
Right.
It approaches zero.
Yeah. Well, and it was because we spent whole shows talking about this, and we won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But the non-strategic use of strategic weapons. So there were no strategic, and there are no strategic targets in Ukraine. And if you're we talked about this too. I like to call this the Paris factor. you lob a nuclear warhead at Ukraine, Paris has 6 minutes to figure out if that missile is going to Kyiv or it's going to Paris. And that's one of the reasons, if not the definitive reason, that this is just not going to happen. It is not going to happen.
Now, this did not appear on the official list of security assistance that was issued by the White House today, but it's everyone's understanding that more Bradley fighting vehicles are on their way to Ukraine, and Ukraine loves the Bradley, and Bradley loves protecting Ukraine.
Wow. You know, the manner in which the Ukrainians used the Bradley was something that was never, that isn't the role of that machine. It has the capability to defend itself against incoming main battle tanks, but defend itself, break contact, and let the big boys come up and deal with the tanks. But we have seen the valor and the virtuoso commanding of those vehicles by the Ukrainian forces. And the Bradley is no pushover. It's got a 20 millimeter chain gun, right? And you have seen how it can wheel and deal on those Russian tanks. It is, but every time I see that, look, we're talking Navy Cross, Distinguished Service Medal, Congressional Medal of Honor. Wow.
Yeah. And you are talking about the bravery of the Ukrainians operating that Bradley, taking on a tank. It's not exactly what the Bradley is designed to do, but you know, those Ukrainians inside the Bradley say we can do this, and
We
and they do it.
and they do it. And the Bradley is such a great piece of gear. Every Soviet legacy Russian piece of equipment on the battlefield is inadequately armored. The main battle tanks being slightly more protected, but Russian armored vehicles are crap. They don't have armor protection. Some of them are vulnerable to 7.62 rifle fire, right? So a rifleman can punch holes in them. But the Bradley, on the other hand, it's one of the safest places you could be on the battlefield is inside a Bradley. And the Ukrainians, they fight that vehicle like they know that. And, but it's amazing. You cannot but be impressed.
Exactly.
More than impressed.
So $2.5 billion announced today by the Biden administration in military assistance going to Ukraine. Uh, Half of it, unfortunately, is going to pay for the production of a lot of this, mostly ammunition and that kind of thing. So, 100 and or 1.2 billion uh, will be used over the course of 2025 to supply Ukraine. So it's a $2.5 billion total package. And from the list I've seen, Chuck, I will say that Ukraine will be amply armed in 2025, but I continue to say inadequately armed.
Or offensive operations. Absolutely. No, there is something that is going on here, though, and it is insidious. It's hard to quantify, but it's happening every day to the Russians when they are in contact. And I talked about that. Basically, every one of their attacks fails, at least in terms of resource compared to objective. They they are squandering, vehicles. They've almost lost 10,000 tanks. Nobody except the United States has 10,000 tanks, right? They're saw a statistic today. They've lost 89,000 pieces of military equipment. So things with wheels on the battlefield, 89,000. There's another number that does that jibe with what we know about 700,000 casualties? Well, 89,000 times at least 3 people in the crew. Wow, that's starting to get up. We can see every time that turret goes up in the air, there's 3 guys that aren't wounded, that aren't missing. They are, well, they might be missing, but they are not gonna, you know, they're not coming home.
Yeah.
So this is hollowing out the Russian army, right? And we look at Assad, we look at Ceausescu in Romania, we look at Gaddafi. Things are monolithic. and unimpeachable until they go from granite to sand. And the first thing that's going to break down is the Russian army. When it is finally counterattacked, Alan, you and I have been talking about this for years. They're going to fly to pieces. I promise you that's going to happen.
And it will happen. It is going to take a lot more delivery of what Ukraine needs, including F-16s. The French are sending Mirage fighter jets. They've already trained the Ukrainian pilots. The F-16s that are in Ukraine are being used primarily in air defense roles, not in close air combat support or anything like that. Now, the Mirage fighter jets, maybe they'll be used differently. I don't know.
Yeah, we said this as well. Look, the F-16, like the HIMARS, it isn't the silver bullet that's going to turn this around. Getting Ukraine to have a top drawer Air Force, we're looking at a decades long, process. The other thing and and one of these days we'll have to get Colonel Jeff Fisher back here as well, you know, to use an Air Force to your utmost, conceive of it as an air battle, right? You need an AWACS up to protect your tankers and your attack aircraft and fighters. And it's this big layered complex operation. And it can all go back to, can you keep an AWACS in the air 24 hours a day? Well, the Russians can't anymore because they've lost. They were down to 6 of them, which isn't enough to put those things up. And, so even that, where still Russia absolutely dominates, right? Ukrainian, they may lay down 10 or 15 airstrikes a day. The Russians lay down 90.
Yeah.
But they don't have it.
No, they don't. And they don't have it. They don't have it right now in Kursk. Uh, Again, the deadline that Putin gave his military to take back Kursk is weeks in the past now. And what we've learned happening in Kursk is that the Ukrainians are taking a deadly toll on Russian soldiers and on their North Korean helpers. I mean, and I think you've seen these reports of how badly Russian and North Korean troops are integrated. It seems as though Russia hasn't even tried to integrate these troops.
Yeah. Well, there was always going to be that language difficulty. And it isn't, to be a military translator, you have to have very high language skills. You're talking about technical terms where uh, verbs matter, nouns matter, times matter. There simply aren't enough North Koreans who speak Russian and vice versa. The other thing is the cynical employment that Russia uses these North Korean troops for. They are being sent unsupported across open terrain, and you and I have talked about every little light blue, light green spot on the map that we put up. Look, that's a killing zone. And you start across one of those open fields with 15 guys, not one of them is going to make it across. You send 100 guys across, maybe you're going to get 20. But again, they've gotten to the next tree line where now they're going to get thermite poured out upon them. So the cynical use of the North Korean troops, and at the very least, there were 10,000 troops, North Korean troops sent into Kursk. At a bare minimum, 10% of that force is eliminated, KIA.
Yeah.
So of that force, conservatively 2 to 1, 30,000 casualties. Wow. And we've already seen some flickering of the resolve of these North Korean forces. If you look at any video where they're sitting by a tree with those big puppy dog eyes, the fight's going out of these guys.
Yeah. I'm not sure it was ever in them in the first place. Now, also in Kursk, Ukraine, again, very wisely targeting logistical hubs. not in the occupied area of Kursk, but somewhere in the rear in Lvov, Ukraine struck a rail yard. This is exactly what they have to do to cut off that umbilical cord to the Russian troops trying to take Kursk back.
Yeah, so here we have a textbook application of either HIMARS or ATACMS. This is both are artillery systems, and again, it's only Russian disinformation that managed to embroil ATACMS and HIMARS as a violation of Russian sovereignty, a long-range weapon system we won't permit. These are artillery systems. They're for tactical use. And in this case, either ATACMS or HIMARS were used against a target that they are absolutely designed for, textbook application, a rail marshaling yard, right? So there's usually only one or two tracks going where you want to go, and periodically there are, we've all seen the fan-shaped rail marshaling yard where you sort out your cars, and they are all in one convenient place if you've got the right kind of guitar to play that target, and that is HIMARS or ATACMS. So this also shows, look, Russian logistics are under strain as well.
No question about it. And the other thing to point out, of course, is the Ukrainians entered Kursk in August. We are about to enter a new year in a couple of days. As you say, every time we talk about Kursk, Chuck, there really is no reason why they cannot hold on to this all the way through the winter.
Yep, they have constricted their defensive lines. They have retracted their position. Ukraine holds on to now somewhere south of 50% of their high water mark, but they've withdrawn to much more solid defensive positions. If you are looking at the 1845 UTC map, and that was this morning actually, you can see look around the city of Sudza and you can see the highway system. Now that goes north and then northeast and actually northwest. That is the main circuit cable of Ukrainian defensive positions. They are completely in charge of their own ground lines of communication and supply. It's going to put them there for a long time. I am willing to buy somebody a shrimp on the Barbie. I see the Ukrainians being there to celebrate Inauguration Day. And I'm also delighted to report that the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade of Russia, implicated in numerous, if not scores, of war crimes, the executions of Ukrainian prisoners of war. There is no more 810th Marine Naval Infantry Brigade. The War College term is hors de combat, which means they are no longer capable of resistance. They are not decimated. They haven't lost 10%. They have lost 90%. So I put up a nice little picture. It was put up by the Ukrainian Marines who, that was a typical bit of road action for what used to be the 810th. Good news from Kursk.
It is good news from Kursk. You would assume because Russians are fighting on Russian soil in Kursk that they would be fighting with more purpose or fighting harder, fighting better. You might also give them the advantage of local knowledge of terrain. But none of this seems to have helped the Russians in any way in their operations in Kursk.
You know, leadership is a factor, and I bang on this a lot, but Putin has exactly the kinds of generals that exist only in a military dictatorship, kleptocracy, run by one of the greatest military minds in his own opinion, right? He doesn't have a major, a lieutenant colonel, a colonel who is worth none of them. He has no general officers that can take a Marine brigade and fight it. He can destroy it. And this unit, the 810th, has already been reconstituted once. So it's been fought to a frazzle twice. traditionally Marines around the world, they are among the best troops a nation has. They have the discipline, the training, the esprit, the equipment, everything else. So it's no small defeat that Ukraine kicked the butt of the 810th in a home game for the Russians and an away game for the Ukrainians.
And of course, in Kursk, as anywhere you look on the zero line, the Russians outnumber Ukraine. We assume in Kursk they probably outnumber the Ukrainians 4 or 5 or 6 to 1. Is it, you know, and the same is true as we move along the zero line to Kreminna. Uh, for months and months and months, we have talked about uh, how Russia outnumbers Ukraine here down in Kreminna. Uh, the real goal that Russia has here, when we look at the map, is the city of Liman. Uh, it's obviously within range of Russian fire. It does get struck every day, but uh, Ukraine has done a magnificent job protecting that city.
It's amazing. Uh, just springboard off Kursk again for a second. We know that at least 50,000 Russian troops, augmented by North Koreans, are operating again in Kursk. I think there are probably somewhere around 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers in that province. 5-to-1 superiority. And I am virtually certain they are going to be there by Valentine's Day. They're just going to be there. So we're coming down to one of the adjacent battlefields here, Kreminna, where the most underachieving forces in all of the Russian army are here. They outnumber the Ukrainians 5 and 10-to-1 in this battle space. And Alan, I went back through, this is almost verbatim a map from 18 months ago. It's almost the same with a few deviations.
Yeah.
It just hasn't changed very much.
Well, when you look at the map, of course, when you talk about local knowledge that the Ukrainians have, especially here around Kreminna, of the terrain, of the defensive orientation of the Zerabets Reservoir, uh, you know, a clear example of how Ukraine uses its local knowledge and takes advantage of terrain to stage ferocious defensive, but we have to emphasize defensive fighting.
Yeah. And, I don't make a point of watching a whole lot of aerial combat stuff for various reasons. I'm not into it. I need to watch it. And of course, I'm pretty clinical with it. There was a recent video, and I think this was probably from 1 or 2 days ago in Kreminna, and it showed one Ukrainian soldier take out 5 attacking Russians in close combat. Okay, that is a momentous achievement. You don't want to find yourself solo fighting an entire fire team of the enemy, but we see a lot of these videos. And what that shows to me on the individual level of soldiering, there was one soldier, and he was taking on 4 disconnected human beings who were not functioning as a unit, didn't have the basic fundamental soldiering skills, including hitting the deck. The best place to figure out what the hell is going on is with all your buttons into the dirt. But to see, this shows me the state of the forces. It comes down to that microcosm. And, it reminds us also that, look, war is a dirty, filthy, murdering business. But those Russian soldiers were at the front, right? They were sent forward. They were to move forward, secure their positions, and make the way for oncoming Russians. They got stopped by one Ukrainian soldier who changed magazines, who moved, who shot, who moved, who communicated. It was a walkover. It was a walkover. So you look at that one little battle, life and death, and you scale it up. That's why the map in Kreminna, where this took place, it still looks the same.
But this is also the situation Ukraine faces everywhere on the Zero One. And I think this um, event that you're describing, Chuck, this engagement, uh, it crystallizes it for everyone. It's one against five. I mean, and that Ukrainian soldier, is not Arnold Schwarzenegger in some kind of superhero movie. He's a guy like you, and you're kind of a superhero. But this was not an ambush. This was an engagement that one highly trained Ukrainian soldier dominated.
Yeah. Look, and also broad daylight. So we've talked about this long ago. Russia's entire military training apparatus broke down. No one is getting sent to the front from Russia who's undergone anything like military training. Not even boot camp, which is basically 3 months of high pressure janitorial work. But it is designed to sharpen the mind, right? To get you to pay attention to detail. And then from there, you go to 6 or 7 arduous months of infantry training. No one in the Russian army does that. You've got completely untrained, clueless, militarily naive civilians who find themselves, as these unfortunate gentlemen did, up against a real soldier. A real soldier. And again, who was no superhero, but his superhero skill was he had the training, right? He knows how to work his weapon. He knows how to change a magazine. He knows how to say, I'm up. He sees me. I'm down. He went from tree to tree. He changed his position and he hit what he was aiming at because he'd been to the rifle range. These guys, I promise you, if I walk that battlefield, I promise you, I'd take a weapon out of those guys' hands. It would be unsafe. It would have a full magazine. One guy, I promise you, died with a magazine in his hand. Instead of changing it, dropping it, put it in, that is the way, that's the way they die.
Sure.
And it's ugly, but they can stop it. Alan, all they got to do is go home.
That's
Just
right.
go.
That's all they have to do. Um, so we will return to the criminal map, but it's important in a way, Chuck, that this map we're looking at today is not so different from the map we looked at a year ago. This has been a year of defense for Ukraine. They have carried out that mission, to my way of thinking, just as well as they possibly could have, and they continue to every single day here in Crimea and elsewhere. If we next go take a look at Chasiv, Ukraine is having success driving some Russian forces out of the eastern neighborhoods of Chasiv.
Yeah, there. And again, we've, as we talked about, at least 70,000 Russian casualties have been expended. Capturing Bakhmut and trying to turn the capture of Bakhmut into some cogent, relevant military gain. Bakhmut was never the place to bury 100,000 of your own troops. It never was going to lead to anywhere. It almost pains me to say this is what we said 2.5 years ago. This is what we said when they were on the outskirts of Bakhmut. This is what we said when they had taken Bakhmut. Chasiv Yar, Chasiv Yar, Chasiv Yar. And it still is Chasiv Yar. We talked about Crimea, where the Ukrainians have successfully, they have frozen the zero line. I mean, you and I have worked on hundreds of maps of Crimea. I'm not kidding, folks, when I said, hey, I could have picked one from last Christmas. But here in Chasiv Yar, you've got a big, if you're looking at the 28 December map, it's the city of Chasiv Yar. You can see the scale in kilometers. This is a pretty big, I'd say almost 1 to 10,000 scale map, which is about the best military map you're going to get. You can actually not see individual houses on this, but you can see that the Ukrainians are operating to the north of Chasiv Yar. They are across the canal. Uh, you can see the topographic lines on this map, which is what makes it gold. And those of you who've been with us for a long time, you know, uh, when you get these maps on YouTube, take a screenshot and blow it up, and you can really get in there the way Alan does. But there was an aggregate plant there, and another reason why we printed this map on the 28th is there was no contact. So the Russians were drawing a breath, and it's a good chance for us to look at exactly where the zero line is. There was an aggregate plant, so just to the west of what is called New Chasiv Yar, which was Chasiv Yar adjoining the canal there, and the Ukrainians have taken that back. And in the meantime, they have pretty much arrested Russian gains here. But this is a very rare day where there wasn't contact. The Russians pushed this place very hard, but this is another example, conservatively, 100,000 Russian dead. And it truly could be 150. This was won by Wagner literally bussing in hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of convicts and burying them here. So, and the other thing is, this has been one of the places of the most ferocious fighting, and this is what, Putin wants more than anything, and I don't think he's going to get it. I just don't.
I don't think he's going to get it either. Chasiv doesn't exist any longer. It's been reduced to rubble. But, you know, take into consideration what Chuck is saying here. 100,000 Russian casualties to advance through Bakhmut and reach the bottom of the hill at Chasiv Yar. Just take a look at this map. You can see all of Bakhmut when you stand atop Chasiv Yar because it's on a high escarpment. Russia invested 100,000 casualties, and they still haven't scaled the heights of Chasiv Yar.
And we're still dealing with the conundrum of the M03 and the H32, which diverge, right? So you want to capture a road junction, right? Transportation nexus, that's a good point. But you don't want to capture one where you're faced with, I can only go north or I can only go west. And the farther I go north or the farther I go west, the farther my forces are apart. So rewinding 18 months ago, before 150,000 Russians were dead, you could look at this map, and Alan said it, John Spencer said it, Colonel John Spencer, I said it, another couple of guys, General Mick Ryan, people above my pay grade folks, General Ben Hodges, we all said it's not worth the fight. This isn't the place to bury 150,000 of your own soldiers, but they did it anyway because they don't have any generals. Alan, they don't have anyone who could talk to Putin and say, these are the military facts.
Right. And, one of the reasons the Russian casualties were so high in Bakhmut is because it was day to day, door to door urban fighting to get through that city. That's how Russia chose to take Bakhmut, to go through it, not around it.
Exactly. And, we mentioned this a million times, and I love saying this. There's a little point on the map, hardly even a hamlet, and its name is Stinky. And that is where you should cross the canal to the north of Chasiv Yar, cross the canal to the south, and converge on that little hamlet. That's how you take Chasiv Yar. Look, the Russians are incapable of doing that. They can't do it. And that is also a little microcosm of this war. The Soviet army and its Russian descendant, it was designed as a mechanized fighting force. They're supposed to do pinchers and capture things with armor to the front, fire and steel, and bite out chunks of NATO's side. They're incapable of doing that anymore. They can't do it. And they are never going to start doing it in this war, Alan. That's just, they're not gonna. They can't.
I don't think they can. Um, you know, 2025 is right around the corner here. I don't think that you're going to see a lot of additional Russian advances as winter comes in January. Actually, it's been a relatively warm winter so far in Ukraine. Um, Kyiv is 31 degrees and cloudy today. Uh, a little a little colder than it is where I am right now, but that's not Ukrainian winter.
No, and it's coming. And the other thing is, at 33 degrees Fahrenheit and freezing rain, you could die in one night.
Oh yeah.
You That could kill you. Bring that back to the microcosm, that could be one reason why one Ukrainian soldier took on and defeated 5 Russian soldiers. If you are hypothermic, if you are hungry, if you are wounded, if you are frostbitten, one guy with a pair of dry socks could clean your clock, right? That that's the way it works.
That's a very good point. Again, from experience, I don't have that kind of experience. I do know how important dry socks are to every soldier who's deployed, and it's not enough to have one spare pair. You need a few spare.
And it even comes down to this. It wasn't until 4 years ago that Russia even went to socks,
Mm.
right? You got your pair of jack boots and you literally wrapped your feet up in rags.
Right.
Right. So look, and a pair of boots for an infantryman, they generally won't last one season, right? They're done by the summer, and you give them a new pair in the fall and they're done. And you give them a winter pair of boots. The summer pairs of boots aren't any good. You could go through easily 4 pairs of boots in a year. I will say this, in Hell Week alone at SEAL training, the boots you start with are utterly destroyed after 1 week. 1 week, they're destroyed. Wow.
Yeah.
And that is a simulated combat environment, and it's pretty well simulated, let me tell you.
Uh, we're going to move to Pokrovsk, and Pokrovsk is a hot place. And when you look at the number of engagements that occur and that are reported by the Ukrainian General Staff every day, the majority of those engagements are taking place in and around Pokrovsk. And there's a new map you put up today, Chuck. It's touch and go.
Yeah, uh, I will also say this, it's usually a bad sign, folks, when you see me put up a map that it shows the city. Uh, it is actually the easiest thing that I get to do is update the daily contours of where the red blob is. The hardest thing for me to do is make a base map. That I don't know why, but there, of all the map sources available, there are none that with the city names or the highway name. It takes me years to get this stuff. Uh, we'll come back out for a second, but right now I'm on the 29 December 2110 UTC map. That is of Pokrovsk City axis. Uh, on the southern limits there of the urban area, there's a little kind of L that comes out of Pokrovsk and turns east-west. The Russians actually got across a couple of city blocks to a neighborhood called Pershe Trevina, and they were kicked back. But there are 2 points of contact on this particular map you can see there. Uh, this is where Russia is trying very hard to get a lodgment, in the city. This is the way they fight. You can see, though, with this L-shaped little bit of urban area, they might get in there, but they're not going to get much farther than that. and then pulling back to the one that was put up on 2/8 December. It shows a larger area of Pokrovsk, and you can see these points of contact, and they are, 5 or 6 kilometers apart in places, 2 or 3 kilometers apart in other places. But again, if you look at Pokrovsk on this 2/8 December map, you can see that the Ukrainians south of the city, they actually counterattacked into the Russian rear, thereby crossing the TO-515 highway. So, you look at these, you look at the maps that Alan and I deal with, the zero line is this red blob, but it's very permeable, right? It isn't a definitive thing. I say this all the time. The zero line is when you look over a tree stump and a bullet flies over your head. That's that's the zero line. And it changes from day to day, hour to hour, and depends on what the weather's doing.
If we look closely at the 29 December map, Chuck, and this is the urban map of Pokrovsk you put up, and you can see the beginnings of a pincer movement that the Russians are trying to attempt here. But Russian troops to the east of Pokrovsk have to cross a lot of obstacles to support the Russian troops trying to enter Pokrovsk from the south. The very first thing they have to do is get through uh, a pretty dense urban neighborhood, cross that railroad track, and then they're all in open terrain, which is the last place you want to be.
Yeah, and especially so north of, Hershey Trevina, so there's a sort of couple of streets of houses and then open terrain, and then that's overlooked by the more urban terrain of, Pokrovsk itself, where, believe it or not, there's probably about 6 or 7,000 civilians who are doing what they can to live a normal life in
Yeah,
that city,
yeah.
which is another the valor, the stubbornness, yeah, valor of the Ukrainian people, even civilians. It never ceases to amaze me. This is an absolutely frontline city, and there are folks that just don't want to leave. They're
That's that's right. And there's no water, there's no electricity, there's no heat, obviously. Yeah. I think there are about 3,000 Ukrainians left in Pokrovsk now, Chuck. And Pokrovsk, of course, is getting shelled and pummeled every single day, every hour of every day.
Yeah, Ruski Mir. That's what Russia is going to deliver to you. Everyone gets their own crater. Uh, yeah, it's so again, you know, this is what Putin wants, right? He wants Pokrovsk. Uh, Here we are, we're talking about, uh, you know, the desire of taking, you know, nexes of transport. So here is a legitimate, Pokrovsk is a legitimate target. There are the M30 and the TO-506, legitimate avenue of advance, right? So there are two roads going kind of in the same direction. Your forces could be mutually supporting. Were you able to get into Pokrovsk and do this? However, I think the days of large-scale ground maneuver warfare for the Russian army, they're over. They're over. That's just reason 27 while they're never going to win this war. With lack of leadership, lack of training, lack of equipment. I mean, all of those other things. I mean, I'm not just in the tank for Ukraine. Let's just look at this the way we would look at Vietnam in 1970. It's not winnable. You
Right.
don't have the right army. You don't have the right training. You don't have the right equipment, and you don't have the will, face it, of these soldiers. They they know no one knows what's going on better than a Russian private. He knows what's going on. Damn right he does.
Yeah, he does know what's going on. And he also knows what should be going on. They should be uh, walking back to Russia. At
They will be.
I think they will be. I think they will be. So we're going to keep an eye on Petros because it's It is a touch and go situation down here, and we'll just have to see what happens in the you know
We're
in the next uh, weeks, not days.
Yep, it's weeks, and I would just say, we keep an eye on. So if you're looking at the city of Pokrovsk there, and to the southeast, there is this, area of control. The Ukrainians have maintained this area of control. You can see the M30 going down there. That is really important because it means the Russians have got to bifurcate any force they're trying to move north. They've got to account for Pokrovsk, and they've got to account for the eastern industrial areas there. That means if they've got 10 things to send somewhere, they're only getting 5, right? They've got to split that. So all of these enormously complicate Russian logistics. And I can't remember if I put this up this week or not. An entire roll of video showing Russian troops taking every civilian Toyota Corolla, farm equipment, whatever had wheels. They're not doing that just because it's fun. They don't have anything else to transfer their stuff. The the wheels are coming off the Russian war machine. Literally.
Yeah, literally.
Literally. And we're gonna see this when they have to fight defensively. That we've said it a million times. The easiest thing to do is attack. The hardest thing to do is get punched in your nose, knocked on your butt, and then get up and fight. They can't do that anymore. I promise you, they can't.
Well, Ukraine needs to be fully armed to go on the offensive, and maybe that day will come in summer 2025. Talking about the wheels coming off the Russian war machine, Ukraine is busy putting new kinds of wheels on the battlefield. A fully robotic force for the apparently the very first time in warfare. That's what Mick Ryan said. A fully robotic force was sent to assault Russians around the little village of Lipsy. This is in Kharkiv Oblast. It, does this actually make sense to you, Chuck? That robots could be the future of war?
Well, if you asked me that 1,000 days ago, I'd say no. But I have to say yes now. And, there's a bit of philosophical irony here that one side has decided to take technology and innovative technology and put it on the battlefield. So we're literally talking about multi-wheeled vehicles with machine guns that are used, thermal cameras, etc., to hit what they're aiming at, can move on the battlefield, backed up by first-person drones and backed up by other drones, and that one belligerent in this conflict amasses all of this technology together in order to save the lives of their own soldiers. So this battle in Whoopsie was actually won by the Ukrainians with 0 casualties because their robots took the casualties. But they're fighting an enemy that doesn't care how many people it loses. That to me was this incredible, irony.
Yeah. It is incredible. I hesitate to use the idea of a video game. I don't think war is ever going to become a video game, but essentially, the Ukrainians with their robots on the battleground were they had the advantage because they were playing a video game against the Russian positions. They watched the battle unfold. They watched their robots tactically advance. That they could see it all unfold before their eyes and control what they did, how they did it, where they went, at what speed. It's a pretty remarkable chapter in the history of warfare.
The video game analogy is really apt. And I do absolutely know this. You get a controllable technology, on the battlefield. That's these unmanned ground vehicles, right? At the user interface, and I know this because look, I worked for DARPA for a number of years. At the interface, they want it to be as much like a controller that gamers are used to. That's the interface. They don't want this complex Batman thing. They want you give this operator something he's been working all his life. And and again, so this just wasn't, let's put two or three of these things in these things were moving with fire and maneuver and, and fire and movement. So one machine comes down, lays down a base of fire. That's what it's called, a base of fire. And the next vehicle moves up. It takes it under a base of fire. All of this time, you are stressing the adversary. You're keeping his head down. In this case, you're literally shooting the trees apart around him. They can put out such a volume of fire that the trees will fall over. I mean, trees.
And one thing the Russians didn't know was whether there were Ukrainian troops participating in this assault. They didn't know it was a fully robotic assault.
No, they didn't. They couldn't know. The other thing is a large part of this attack took place at night. And there, there's you have a couple of advantageous situations. If you're a soldier and you got 60 pounds of gear on, and I want you to go 400 yards, well, just go get 65 pounds and go run down to the 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
Okay. That ground vehicle doesn't care that you're going 2-3 kilometers. It can do it. The other thing is that you're an undertrained Russian soldier looking out. Maybe you hear the engines of the ground vehicles, but probably you don't. You're getting shot at. The first time something goes off next to you, you are flash blind. You can't see your hand in front of your face. You can't hear anything. It's so loud, but what's coming at you can see you perfectly, right? It's got your white hot heat signature. The crosshairs go right on you. It won't miss. In this case, that is one of the reasons why this battle succeeded for the Ukrainians. The technology was superior to the human soldiering skills it was up against. So we're going to see this again and again. And it's good to listen to someone like General Mick Ryan, who has written the most well-regarded books on the future of warfare. He is a scholar. He says this was an epoch-making event, and who am I to argue with him, right?
I'm not going to argue with them. When I think about robots, I think about the lunar and Martian rovers, of course. Especially the Martian rovers. They're still roving on Mars. They weren't even designed to rove this long on Mars. And you put together that technology for a military purpose, and you run it through the minds and hands of Ukrainians. You've got a pretty good winning formula, I'd say.
Well, and this was a human in the loop endeavor. So every one of those ground vehicles had a human pilot. Uh, Ditto the drones, but it is not far over the horizon where you look at the train, you've got a certain amount, modest amount in my estimation, of AI, and this attack could be prosecuted completely without humans in the loop.
So the day is coming where you won't send a soldier, where you can send a robot, right?
And that day is probably already here. And I would just say this, and this was a direct action mission with a discernible geographical objective, right? Try to imagine if this was only a diversion. How could you tell this was a diversion? Because it's coming, they're inflicting casualties, and it's getting closer. And I promise you the Russians reacted to this, right? They tried to reinforce this position. And here's the other thing. The Russians don't have anything like this. They just don't, you know. And the Ukrainians are constantly I- what haven't they done? They've taken back the Black Sea.
Yeah.
They've conducted a fully robotic attack, right? The first time in modern warfare. The Nazis had, remote control vehicles in World War II. They had a specific purpose. They were used on a very limited basis, but this was a company or better sized attack carried out by robots. Wow. Don't let that one pass you by. Okay. Don't just go shrug that off. Amazing.
I'm sure we will revisit it. This having been done once by the Ukrainians will surely be done again, uh, in a time and place, a location on the zero line where it makes sense. There are plenty of places on the zero line where terrain doesn't give your robot force any advantage whatsoever. And you can't even use them.
Right. I mean, they are to be used for a specific purpose. They are also, traditionally you have a zero line and out in front of it are pickets or listening posts or observation posts. And those are two soldiers out there, they are your tripwire. You don't have to do that anymore, right? This thing wheels itself up there at night. It spools down. It's got cami nets on it. You could walk right up on this thing and not see it, but that is your eyes and ears out there. And arguably, it does that job better than a soldier can. Its senses are keener. Its ability to react and engage targets are quicker than what most soldiers are capable of.
It's something we're going to keep watching. Technology in this war demands your attention, and Chuck and I try to give it the attention it deserves. It is hard to believe, Chuck, that we have been through so many days of war, 1,041 days as we come to the last day of the year of 2024. Um, the anniversary of the invasion, of course, approaching in February. I feel quite certain that there will be continued fighting between now and February 22nd. I doubt very much that any negotiations, even if they begin, could be concluded so quickly.
Yeah, 3 more years. I'm sorry to say that. I don't see the negotiations going anywhere. Frankly, I don't see uh, a good reason for Ukraine to enter into them either. And Putin has said he isn't. So, and again, as you so rightly assessed, he thinks he can win this,
Yeah.
and none of his generals dare tell him otherwise.
Right. Putin thinks he can win. His generals don't give him the facts. But come back in 2025 and listen to Chuck Farrer here on Indications and Warnings, and you'll get all the facts you need to understand why Russia will never defeat Ukraine.
It isn't going to happen, folks. This is Putin's quagmire, and I'm going to move the chess piece one more spot. This is going to be the end of him. This is going to be the end of him. So we'll all be here for that delightful day, but I promise you it's coming. He's
And
got all
that,
his chops.
that ruble you have in your pocket buys 5% less today than it bought yesterday.
And that's good because it's worth 5% less than 1 cent. Right? Think about that.
Yeah. And so let's see, how many rubles do I need to buy a penny candy?
I don't know. Yeah, there aren't any more penny candies.
Chuck, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
A great year I've learned from you these past 1,000 days. It's a privilege. It really is an honor to be able to appear on Indications and Warnings with you, Chuck, and to learn as much as I have. I want to thank you for that. I'm not gonna let you say I have a graduate degree. I'm years and years away from
Alan, I just got to tell you, I got the best radio partner I ever had. We've both been in radio before. I'm telling you, I got the best partner ever. And I'm going to have to say it. Look, something rubbed off in the last 1,100 days. And I mean it. Command and Staff College and the War College. And we go one more year and you'd have a PhD in national security affairs. So let's keep on it.
Let's keep on it. We will. Happy New Year, Chuck. Slava Slava Ukraine.
Yeah, Heroyam Slava. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.